This week on Quality Digest Live, is the Hawthorne effect real or imagined?
Plus, cultivating an attitude for innovation. That and more when we come back.
This week's sponsor of Quality Digest Live is Olympus, specializing in easy-to-use microimaging and metrology systems that provide the measurement and images you need.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for November 1st, 2013. November? It's November already. Wow.
Jeez.
November 1st, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, we got some interesting news this week, I think. Interesting if you're involved in the standards world, or in particular ISO 13485. On October 24th, the International Accreditation Forum, the IAF, announced it is now able to accept applications from accreditation bodies to join in its multilateral recognition arrangement, that's an MLA, for its new ISO 13485 medical device accreditation. This is the largest technical trade agreement ever prepared for the medical QMS ISO 13485. And by the way, if you're not familiar, the IAF is a worldwide association of accreditation bodies. Its primary function is to develop worldwide programs supporting accreditation of conformity assessment activities.
Right.
This technical trade agreement is good news, and for a couple reasons. One of the problems in the accreditation world, and this is particularly true in Europe, is the proliferation of counterfeit registrations. And we're talking things like, let's say, CE mark or ISO 9001 or, in this particular case, ISO 13485. And when we say counterfeit, we mean fake.
Fake, yeah.
A company shows you an ISO 9001 certificate, let's say, supposedly issued by Lloyd's or TÜV or BSI, any registrar, right? Except they never were audited. The cert is fake. So what was needed was some sort of traceability that end users could use to easily verify a certificate, and also a means of giving some validity to a certificate. So even if it wasn't fake, you wanted some assurance that there was some validity behind it, that all the auditors and the entire chain that leads up to a certification is somehow accredited, that somebody oversees the whole process. So with the new agreement, IAF's signatory members, in the US these would be, let's say, ANSI or ANAB, A2LA, IAS, I think those are the four in the United States, they agree to allow a special IAF assessment team to come in and regularly assess them. In turn, the accreditation bodies, let's say ANAB or ANSI, so forth, can use the IAF MLA mark, which provides worldwide acceptance of the ISO 13485 certificates by other IAF members. Now I'll get to that in a little bit, what this actually means. The next step, in similar fashion, conformity assessment bodies, what we typically think of, let's say, as registrars, again, companies like UL, BSI, TÜV, et cetera, that wish to be accredited to provide ISO 13485 certificates to their clients must agree to annual assessments by the IAF member accreditation body, like ANAB. And in turn, they can also apply the IAF MLA mark to any of the 13485 certificates they issue to their manufacturers. So let's kind of recap what we're talking about here. This is kind of the chain. The IAF assesses the accreditation body, ANSI, let's say, who in turn accredits the conformity assessment body, the registrar, NSAI, let's say, who in turn accredits a company, Quality Digest, let's say, and issues them a certificate. So there is verification that everyone in the chain is displaying some level of competence. And the other part in this is because all of these eventually, at the end of the chain, they're all signatories to IAF. If you have a certificate, Quality Digest, let's say, has an ISO 9001 certificate that has the IAF MLA stamp, that certificate will be honored in any country that also has IAF signatories for their accreditation body, right? So one certificate good everywhere worldwide, and that's always been kind of the goal of the IAF. So, yeah, so basically this is going to be accepted everywhere. Now, the next part of this is that ISO International Organization for Standardization, finally is performing trial runs on a new accredited certificate database. Anybody remembers we used to run such a database a long time ago. Only IAF-based accredited certificates will be included in the new ISO database. It's expected to begin running for users worldwide around the end of 2014. It will include ISO 13485 and ISO 9001 certificates, as well as other quality management system certificates that are supported, I should say, by IAF-based accreditation. And here's the key part. This is also what helps to eliminate counterfeit or suspect certificates. The new database will allow manufacturers, the end user, the purchasing department, let's say, to more quickly determine if they are holding fake certificates or if the company they're dealing with has a fake certificate. If their certificate is not listed in this database when it finally rolls out, it may have been issued by an organization that either is not accredited, they're showing you a fake certificate, or perhaps the accreditation, their certificate has not been properly accredited. So this is a big thing. This is something that at one time there were 3 companies doing this. Quality Digest was maintaining an ISO 9001 database. World Preferred was doing it. And McGraw-Hill was doing it, had it at one time. They were putting actually out a CD of it. All 3 of us stopped doing it because it was hard to get support. It was a big job for the registrars to send us our data all the time.
And that's what happened. We stopped getting the data.
Yeah, and it just made sense that ISO would do it. So now they are. So when this rolls out, this is going to be a big deal because this is really going to provide procurement people worldwide the ability to verify that the people they're buying from that say they're ISO 9001 registered or 13485 or whatever actually are.
And it's an important story, and certainly it's one that we've talked about the lack of this for a while, and I think it is a long time coming. And you know, this is something that I think that all of us who are in the standards field needs. And you know, it's not really, to tell you the truth, it's not really as much an issue here in North America as it is in other parts of the world, but it's an issue everywhere, and I think that people need to be aware of it. So good stuff there, good work there. Okay, well now over the past couple of decades, mass investment from developed economies to underdeveloped ones has revolutionized the world of international business. And according to Knowledge of Wharton, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Nope.
That's right. The recent article, As Developing Economies Grow, Global Value Chains Reach a Turning Point, originally appeared on the Knowledge of Wharton website. It ran in Quality Digest Daily this past Tuesday. Now, the piece quotes a report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and the World Trade Organization, which indicates that for the first time in history, developing economies attracted more foreign direct investment than more developed ones. This could have a profound effect on the competitiveness of industry in these emerging nations in the coming years. And those changes are going to ripple throughout global value chains, or GVCs, and as a consequence, the international economy may never quite be the same. Hear me out here. This is an interesting story. GVCs, in their most basic form, allow multinational enterprises to control inputs like raw materials and labor to produce efficient outputs like finished goods. Reducing costs and increasing the profits have always been the chief goals of GVCs. And that has resulted in things that we've seen like offshoring and the relatively low wages that are paid to workers in nations that do a lot of the actual manufacturing and assembly work in these emerging markets for a lot of multinational companies, right? But maybe that's coming to an end. As economic pockets in Asia, South America, and even Africa begin to attract more and more of this capital, investment capital, their power and influence is starting to grow. Wages are on the upswing, and smart business leaders in these lands are finding ways to control not only production, but also distribution within their spheres. As a consequence, local companies and individuals, and not necessarily multinational conglomerates, are retaining the higher value aspects of the value chains in which they're part. So what's going on here is that as the influence in these markets is growing, business leaders in those areas are starting to accumulate more capital and more power. And the manufacturing and assembly of stuff is often the lowest value part of the value chain, right? What you want to do is you want to control the distribution, you want to control the sales and the marketing. And they're starting to be able to do that more locally than internationally, but I think it's going to happen internationally as well. And that's what this story is talking about, is this idea that we're seeing really a flattening of this whole picture, right? Slowly but surely, the developed world is being developed. We're getting closer to the point where we have a truly flat, truly global economy where everyone gets to enjoy the benefits of these value chains. That means more consumers, more markets, more goods and services, more profits. and a higher standard of living overall for everybody. I think that's obviously a good thing. So for more information on this story, and in fact all the pieces that Dirk and I are going to be covering on today's show, just click on the story links right below the video screen, right down there.
Well, let me ask you, if I remember in that story, they were talking, they used, this was a story that used Africa.
Africa was a big example.
So very resource rich.
Very resource rich,
But the problem was they didn't have,
well, for instance,
they're creating the resources, but they're not making the money from it because the money's what? All in
it's all in the packaging, the sales. And like, for instance, cashews. Africa, the lands in Africa grow a lot of cashews in the world, right? But those cashews are often shipped to India, let's say, for packaging and resale. And Africa just gets the benefit of the smallest part of that value of getting paid for the stuff, not getting paid to make the stuff into something that's going to be sold at a higher value than it was originally pulled out of the ground.
So the goal is what? Is to bring those in country?
In country. So the people within those countries are trying now to understand ways to control the distribution, not only the production, but the distribution and the sales of this stuff. Much more money to be made there now. What's that going to do to the multinationals that have controlled a lot of that over time? I don't know. And cashew nuts are just one example. Is all sorts of industries this applies to.
Right.
Really interesting. I think we're going to, this is going to, it's happening. We know it's happening. It's going to continue to happen, and I think we're going to keep our eye on it going forward. Oh, and before you jump into the features, we encourage you all to write us. You know, we don't mention it every show, but sometimes you guys do write us. QDL@QualityDigest.com. Write us if you see anything on the show that you want to comment on, that story we just covered, or Dirk's earlier story, or the stories we're going to be covering. Write us now. We'll answer the questions for you right on the air.
Or we'll pretend to answer them.
Or we'll pretend to answer them. We'll try.
We're not smart. We just pretend we're smart on TV.
He does.
All right. All right. This week, Paul Naismith gave us a great example of trust but verify.
Doverai Nitoverai. Remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
That's right.
When it comes to learning. Ronald Reagan.
Actually, it was Mikhail Gorbachev.
I think Ronald Reagan
quoted to Gorbachev.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something like that. Or Yeltsin, one of those guys.
That was Gorbachev. Yeah.
I think it was Gorbachev. Okay.
As a young quality professional, Naismith, our gangly Scottish columnist, was taught all about the Hawthorne effect. He was taught that sometime in the 1920s, 1930s, somewhere in America, there was a factory. Remember, he was in Scotland. Right. There was a factory, so somewhere in America.
Somewhere in that small
There was
country.
a factory that made things. A group of researchers used the factory to study what could increase productivity. So they did things like the researchers came in, they made the lights brighter. They turned the lights up, and hey, look at that. Productivity improved. So they turned the lights down, and productivity improved.
Oh, you're right.
No, they expected that it would actually go down, but it didn't.
Right.
They made other changes as well. So they kept changing kind of the workplace and experimenting with making changes in the workplace, and they discovered that no matter what they did, productivity improved.
Right.
Their conclusion, Paul was taught, was that having a lab coat wearing examiner standing to the side of the process will influence the personnel in the area because they are getting someone's attention. The idea that because somebody's paying attention to what you're doing, you know you're part of an experiment, that influences your actions and therefore productivity increases. And Paul was taught this was called the Hawthorne effect after the scientist who discovered it. Okay, now some of you are shaking your head. I see you out there. I see you. So Paul goes through his quality life and eventually becomes a quality mentor himself. So he's telling the same stories to his class one day, and one of them sticks up his hand and says, "Hey, Mr. Naismith, you're full of Guinness."
And
it wasn't called Hawthorne after the person who discovered it, you jit. It was Hawthorne referred to Western Electric's Hawthorne Works, where the experiments took place. So lesson one for Naismith was his early mentor had only part of the story right. This one, kind of a minor bit, who cares where the name really came from, really, but the mentor was wrong on part of this. Lesson two, and this is the big one, came many years later. Naismith was sitting on the edge of his seat. A BBC series, more or less, with Tim Hartford had come on the radio. He and his wife were traveling from the airport back home, and his wife's falling asleep. And the More or Less series, by the way, is a really interesting show that looks at numbers, statistics, and other fun stuff like that. Just fun for stuff like Naismith, not so much for his wife. This particular episode was on the Hawthorne effect. So in the show, Hartford delves into the findings of Stephen D. Levitt and John A. List. And you may be familiar with Levitt's name of Freakonomics. And List is one of the top 10 economists in the world. Well, Levitt and List had found the original papers documenting the studies done at Hawthorne. Listen to what I just said.
The original papers.
The original papers. You see, until this time, the papers were believed to be lost. Everything we know and have been taught about the Hawthorne effect was conjecture. It wasn't based on the papers because the papers didn't exist.
Yeah.
The entire methodology, everything behind it was gone. It was a myth, say Levitt and List. The data as revealed by the papers that List and Levitt eventually found do not support the myth, they said. It was a good story. It kind of seemed sensible. And if you think about it, well, sure, somebody's watching what you're doing. You're going to do better, right? Because they're watching me. I'm going to do better. So there's a sense to it. And that's the way myths get perpetuated. They got to make sense. They can't seem completely crazy.
Yeah.
So it kind of made sense. And there you go, a myth is born. So according to Levitt and List, quotes, perhaps the most important lesson to be learned from the original Hawthorne experiments is the power of a good story. The mythology surrounding the Hawthorne experiments arose largely around absent careful data analysis and has persisted for decades, even in the face of strong evidence against it. While our research is probably no more likely than the previous papers to put an end to such myths, at a minimum, it raises the cost of propagating these stories among those who are concerned with scientific accuracy. End quote. The lesson for him, says Naismith, and actually I would add really for all of us, is that we should seek the original source of any information that we're given. I mean, there is kind of this tendency, whether it's in school, what we're taught in grade school or high school or college or from a mentor, that we just accept what we're taught. And to a certain extent, you can't really get around that too much. I mean, you can't try to do original research yourself all the time. But I would say that if you're going to become a teacher or a mentor, that at that point, it might make sense to make sure that what you were taught is actually true.
Yeah.
I think the other side of that is things change over time. We discover things over time. So maybe nobody questioned Hawthorne, the Hawthorne experiment back when Naismith was first taught about it. But a lot of research has gone on since then. It's not just Levitt and List. There have been papers done before Levitt and List which questioned this whole idea of what the Hawthorne experiment purported to show, right? So I guess his lesson and something that he was kind of writing about in that article is just the importance, if you're going to be a teacher, if you're going to be a mentor, and you're going to be passing on information, remember that you're perpetuating stuff. You're teaching people stuff. You want to make sure that you're not teaching something that is out of date or even just flat out wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the idea of psychology is always a big one here. We talk about it a lot, is the idea that myths perpetuate and stories are told through feelings, you know, and we're data-driven. We're in a data-driven industry here, and I think that's why this is so well taken. This point that Paul's making here is that, you know, you need to really have data to back up what you're saying, assertions that you're making. We all can
not just my teacher taught
me that, or it made sense. Gosh, of course it would. This is a child with a lab coat sitting there. Of course, it's gonna lights go up, lights go down. It's gonna change. But I think that there's sometimes a value for knowledge that you just know on a gut level, but you have to combine it with data, and you've got to, and especially something like this, the Hawthorne experiment, which is so well known and
that's
renowned.
the funny thing about it is everybody knows this experiment.
Sure, it's very popular, it's very well known, but it's not true as we found. I'd be curious. I don't know if Paul even really referenced it, because I haven't read them. What the actual papers said? What were the results of the Hawthorne works? Research. What came out of that?
I think Naismith doesn't talk about it, but I believe Levitt and List talk about it in their book. And actually, if you want to see that book, if you go to the article, links below the page, go to Naismith's article on the Hawthorne effect, read down through that. There is a reference and a link, I believe, out to the Levitt and List book.
Yeah.
And you can I think it's on Amazon or something. You can actually read the book, and they go through it, and they actually reference other studies that have been done. I mean, they happen to find the original papers and were able to look at that data, but they also mentioned that previous studies have been done, which pretty much kind of says that there's other things going. It's not that they didn't see something. It's that the conclusions, or at least the conclusions that we've been taught, aren't really supported by their data. Yeah, there's other things going on.
The urban legend that came out of that isn't the story, the real story there. Okay, great. Great stuff there. Thanks, Derek. Okay, well, I'm going to turn now to another article we ran this week called Innovation is an Attitude. Innovation is an Attitude, and that was by Alan Nickel. It ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. You can see it right there. And this is a fun one because Alan Nickel's talking about a day he had with his kids, or a kid, I think, at the grade school. They had a kind of a field day, and it was fun day. He was there, Alan, with his kid, and it was fun. It was illuminating as well. And I'll kind of give you a quick rundown of what this experiment or what this exercise was all about. There was a high jump team building exercise, and what the kids had to do was they all had to get over a bar that was set at a certain level, and then the bar would be raised until they couldn't get over it. Now, the part of this that was the team building was that all the kids in the class had to be able to get over that level. So it wasn't like, you had a high level that one athletic kid could get over, but then the smallest kid couldn't. They all had to be able to get over the same level, so they had to figure out a way to do that and support each other in doing it. Well, there were volunteers that were doing this with them. There were teachers, and there were also volunteers from a local high school that were participating in this. So one team really was kind of pushing the boundaries of safety, and they were the kids,
throwing them over.
The high school kids were basically kind of giving the kids a little foot up and kind of slinging them over the bar, and they were getting over a very high level. And the other team didn't take any chances at all. And of course, what do you think happened? The first team won. But they won at the cost of some bumps and bruises and a lot of worried parents. The second team lost, but nobody got hurt, and it was safe, and the parents weren't very concerned. So what does this tell you? What's the lesson of this that Alan Nickel draws from it? Well, he compares it to basically to product launches in any organization that's coming out with anything new. And the choice is always whether you want to be fast or flawless, right? Do you want to be innovative or do you want to be safe? And is that utopia or is it the real world? I mean, he points out, Nickel, that having both has always been kind of the goal, but it may not be feasible. I mean, and you see why. He says you can't put both those in a bottle. It's a combustible combination, and it's going to explode because, you can't have a team that both wants to push the envelope, be really aggressive with a product that maybe nobody's seen before, and yet at the same time be safe and have the common feeling that's going to resonate well with customers, because it probably won't. You can't really do both those things. We talk a lot on the show about the downside of silos, right? I mean, and it's, again, maybe it's another one of these Hawthorne effect things where it's kind of common knowledge that silos aren't good. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe in this case, the silo approach to work can actually work, right? I mean, maybe you can have a high-flying, get-over-the-bar R&D team that's going to basically push every envelope you can, right? They're going to look at this new product launch and they're going to take every possible risk they can and not worry necessarily about the practicality of what they're doing. Meanwhile, maybe in another silo, you can have a sales and fulfillment team that's not really going to be concerned about the envelopes the R&D team is pushing.
Like whether the product actually exists or not.
Yeah, right, exactly. But they're going to look maybe at the practicality of what the market's going to do with it. How receptive are they going to be to that? And they're going to consider and overcome the bottlenecks and physical realities of that product that the R&D team gives them, or not.
Sure, we can make that.
Sure, we can make that happen. I mean, sales guys do it all the time. Sure, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Somebody else will fulfill it. Ideally, both teams are going to bounce these ideas off of each other, and they're not going to really necessarily live in each other's worlds, but they're going to bounce those ideas back and forth. The R&D team is going to, again, push the envelope. They're going to create a product that's innovative enough to be a true difference maker in the market, which is what innovation is all about. You want to have difference makers. And the R&D team then is going to kind of look at that and say, yes, but look at this, look at that, look at that, look at that. And together, they could, I think, probably shape a product that maybe you won't have the best of both worlds, but we'll have a shot at delivering both, being an innovative breakthrough as well as being safe enough to land comfortably and not have the bumps and bruises and be received well by the customers that you're trying to shoot for. This reminded me of another article actually that we covered by Matthew May this week, you may recall, The Presence of Purpose. And this was a good story that Matthew wrote as well, where he's talking about where he was doing a team exercise himself, and they were trying to define a mission, a purpose for their organization. And he put a little Zen stone in front of the table for all the different groups, and they were like, well, what's that? And he said, well, you tell me what it is. And they came up with all sorts of creative ideas about what the stone was. Used for skipping across water, or it could be a beautiful setting in your backyard, whatever it was. Doorstop, whatever, pet rock, But the point of that was that the people were able to define a purpose for the rock, for a stone, right? And he said, well, gosh, if you can do it for a rock, you can do it for your organization. I mean, what's the purpose of your organization? Innovatively, what's the creative purpose of what you're doing? So the moral of the story, the moral of stories, is that, as the case may be, is that creativity has to be married to practicality, I think. It has to be communicated properly throughout the organizations. People have to mentor, like the high school kids kind of mentored the kids over the bar, right? And you have to be able to foster that and marry it with practicality, ultimately, because if you can do that, whether it's a grade school or a Fortune 500 company, you're going to give yourself the best possible chance to succeed. Again, be a breakthrough company that also can have stuff that you know is going to have a good chance of succeeding within the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said an important thing there is you got to have a culture. You got to have at the corporate level, you got to have people that are willing to take risks, and sometimes even substantial risks, not comfortable risks, but even uncomfortable risks. But there's got to be limits to it. In other words, there's got to be some control over it, or at least some guidelines. How much risk are we willing to take? You know, how much money are we willing to spend on this? Or I should say, how much money are we willing to lose on this endeavor? Mm-hmm. You know, we'll set aside X amount of money. We're willing to go that far. We're willing to lose that much. We hope we're not going to lose money. We hope it's going to succeed. We hope we're going to make tons of money off of it. But we're willing to risk this much in order to go down that path and see if it works.
For this period of time
for this,
as well.
For a period of time.
And that's the way it ultimately works or doesn't work for companies that are successful. But there needs to be both elements, both hemispheres of that brain internally in the organization. And personally, like I say, I think silo approach maybe can work for that.
Up to a point
for that.
Okay. Well, as you know, you guys comment a lot on articles that we write. Sometimes you comment directly in the article. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that, but if you happen to be logged into our website, you can always leave a comment directly on an article down below it. And sometimes you guys send us an email to, if you click on Contact Us or whatever it says at the top of our website, you can send us a comment. And we got a comment today regarding an article that we appeared in QDD last week, and also we covered on the show. And this was a story by Tony Gilpin, which the premise was basically the skills gap is a myth. Gilpin and others believe that it's kind of a concoction. It's really more of a political thing going on, and there really is no skills gap per se.
Right.
Okay, so we got a letter from one of our readers that said, why would a publication geared toward industry include articles from someone who sounds like a Marxist? I have no choice but to deal with the fact that most media is left-leaning, but this individual is crazy. And that was from Doug.
Thank you, Doug, first of all, we always want feedback of all kinds.
Yep,
it's always good.
Even if it's that we're left-leaning and siding with the Marxists.
Right.
But here's the thing, is we cover a lot of issues in Quality Digest Daily on our website, and we don't filter them. In other words, whether we agree with a position, and I don't happen to agree with everything that Tony Gilpin said in this article, but whether we agree or disagree, whether we think they're crazy or not, if they're making a point that is representative of some portion, and look, a lot of people believe the way Gilpin does, then it's our responsibility as a media company to put it out there and let it get thrashed out. In public, right? I mean, why present? What good is there in presenting only one side of an argument? It doesn't make anybody think. In order to think, in order to consider all the ramifications of a belief or of an opinion, you have to look at both sides. And that is exactly what we do with things like that. Now, I will say, regarding that article, if you thought that article was interesting, I would suggest that you keep your eyes open for one article, maybe two articles coming up next week. One article is by me, who kind of, it's an op-ed that kind of takes issue with what Tony is saying and kind of puts everything that she says in maybe a slightly larger context. There's also an industry article also related to STEM education and the skills gap from industry, and this one happens to be from Bayer, and we were hoping to run that next week. If not next week, then the week after that. We'll get that in there. So if you're interested in this topic, keep your eyes open. You will be seeing both of those come out. Mine for sure, I think, is coming out Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Good stuff there. Yeah, the marketplace of ideas, I think, is really what we're looking at here. And hey, we've heard it. I've heard it many times too. The media's left-leaning. Well, you know, I mean, I can tell you for sure, and with no, I don't think Dirk would overturn me on this, that, you know, we go to each story that we run neutrally. I mean, we really look at it, and the only thing that we look at in terms of running it is, does this further the conversation in the marketplace of ideas? And that's what Benjamin Franklin referred to this great democracy of ours as a marketplace of ideas, and that's media's role, and that's what we try to do. So we encourage comments, we appreciate them, thank you for keeping us on our toes, but we definitely feel like we're not taking any sides in the political spectrum. We hope we're not. So keep us on our toes, definitely. Okay,
right.
Well, that's our show for the week, but before we close, I'd like to offer our thanks to this week's sponsor, Olympus America. Discover another dimension in microimaging and metrology with test, measurement, inspection, and imaging instruments designed for high precision quality control and R&D. Olympus engineered solutions enhance quality and productivity in industrial markets around the world. So for more information, click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of your player screen right down there.
That's right. Well, that is the end of our show for today. We thank all of you for joining us. Hope you had a great Halloween last night.
That's right.
Boop.
It was fun. A lot of candy.
Yep. Eating it here this morning.
That's right. A little leftover.
All right. So that is it for today, and we will see you next week at Quality Digest Live.
That's right. Have a great weekend.
So long.
Bye.
Thank you.